Follow the sound of the bell. Don't you dare break ranks. Those were the words of Hank, the blind cowboy who somehow led his men through ambushes, sandstorms, and betrayal. He could no longer see the sunrise, yet he carried a vision brighter than any man around him. This is not just a Western tale. It's a true Wild West story of loyalty, grit, and survival. True Wild West Stories invites you to listen. The night wind rolled low over the dry plains, carrying the scent of dust and old grass. Hooves beat steady into the cracked Texas earth as a string of riders nudged their horses forward. The sun had ducked behind the hills, leaving a glow that smeared orange across the sky, and already the coyotes had started to sing. Hank McGraw rode at the front, upright in his saddle, reins held loose in one weathered hand. His eyes, milk white with blindness, were hidden behind the shade of a sweat-stained Stetson. The old man didn't need eyes, or so they said. Not when he'd spent 40 years riding every god-forsaken trail between Amarillo and Santa Fe. Still don't trust it, Eli muttered behind him, just loud enough for the others to hear. Guy can't see a damn thing. What if he leads us into a ravine? Dusty clicked his tongue and spat into the wind. He ain't blind where it counts, boy. Eli snorted. He's blind everywhere, Dusty. Behind them, the herd of longhorns stretched like a river of shadows across the plain, grunting and restless. The air was dry enough to crack lips, and the only light came from a sliver of moon and the dim lantern hanging from Mason's saddle horn. Mason said nothing, just kept his eyes sharp and his mouth shut, same as always. Hank raised his chin slightly. Ground dips west in a half-mile, he rasped, voice like rust scraping tin. We'll veer east, follow the ridge, keep the cattle calm. Wolves like to wait by the riverbank. Wolves, Eli muttered again, gripping his rifle tighter. Hell of a start. The first campfire was lit just past midnight. Dry mesquite snapped and popped, casting flickering shadows against the pale hides of the cattle. Dusty brewed coffee in a dented pot blackened with age. The scent of it, burnt and strong, filled the air. The young ones huddled close, boots off, rubbing their sore feet and pretending not to stare at Hank as he sat silent, fingers resting gently on his saddle horn like it was an old friend. Mason finally spoke. You really sure about the route, Hank? Nope, the old man replied, slow and calm. Ain't never sure about nothin'. But this ain't guessin'. I remember the wind here, smells of dry creek bed and rabbit shit. River's 30 minutes east. I can feel the slope. Eli chuckled, low and bitter. Man talks like the dirt whispers to him. Hank didn't rise to it, just turned his head slightly, like he could hear something the others couldn't. And then, from the darkness, a distant, sharp howl. The herd stirred. The next moment, it came again, closer, longer. Coyotes, or worse. The cattle began to shift, snorting and stomping. One kicked at the air, another bellowed. The firelight danced off wide eyes and tense muscles. Get up, Hank barked. Dusty, swing wide to the left. Eli, light another torch. There was no hesitation. Dusty jumped up and mounted fast, galloping toward the edge of the herd. Eli cursed, but did what he was told. Mason unslung his rifle, eyes narrowed into the black. Keep the light movin', Hank shouted, voice gaining heat. Don't let 'em bunch. Hooves thundered. The cattle surged, then faltered, as Dusty whooped and cracked his whip. The flicker of Eli's torch threw long shadows. Somewhere in the dark, the howl sounded again, this time, farther. They're backing off, Mason said after a moment. Yeah, Hank muttered. They got no stomach for fire tonight. The chaos ebbed. The cattle settled. One by one, the men drifted back to the fire, sweat drying cold on their necks. Eli sat down hard, eyes still scanning the dark. Damn lucky. No such thing as luck, Dusty said. Just folks who know what they're doing. And those who don't. They looked over at Hank, who had gone still again, head tilted toward the wind like he could read it. For a long beat, nobody said a word. The fire crackled. The scent of burnt beans and black coffee mingled with the cold. The younger men glanced toward their guide, uncertain. They didn't speak it out loud, but in their eyes was a question that hadn't been answered yet. Did this blind old bastard really know the trail? Or were they all just chasing ghosts? The moon hung low like a cracked silver coin, casting a cold sheen across the narrow slot canyon. Its walls rose like the ribs of a giant beast, jagged and unforgiving. End hissed through the rock corridors, whispering half-forgotten warnings to anyone fool enough to ride through this late. Hank's horse slowed, hooves echoing in the silence. He lifted his chin slightly. "This canyon's been bloodied before," he muttered. "Back in '83, a gang holed up in here and made a damn butcher shop out of 3 deputies. Dusty gave a low whistle. "Reckon we'll make it through in one piece?" "Long as nobody gets stupid," Hank said, spitting to the side. "Or slow." Eli scoffed. "Ain't nothing here but dust and wind." They rode in single file. The cattle had been left tied near the canyon's mouth, too wide to pass through the narrow walls. Only the 4 of them, Hank, Eli, Dusty, and Mason, went forward on horseback, scouting for a passable trail or danger lurking in the dark. The silence was strangling. Then, crack, gunfire, from above. "Shit!" Eli yelped as rock exploded near his head. His horse reared, nearly tossing him. "Ambush!" Dusty wheeled his mare around just as another shot rang out. Sparks danced from the canyon wall, and a shower of stone bits peppered his shoulder. "Up high," he shouted, pointing. "They're shooting from the damn ridge line." "Split wide," Hank barked. "Sound off if you see shadows." More gunfire erupted. The canyon turned into a war drum, bullets ricocheting off stone, echoing back in confused bursts. Voices yelled from above, rough and ragged. "Get down there, you sons of bitches!" Dusty ducked low and spurred his horse, weaving between jagged rocks. He spotted movement, just a flicker, and raised his rifle. Crack! A scream followed. One body tumbled from above, arms flailing, landing with a sick thud against the canyon floor. Dusty didn't stop to watch. "Hell yeah," he growled. Eli fired wildly, missing. A round grazed his upper arm, ripping his shirt and skin alike. "Damn it!" he roared, clutching the wound. "Keep low!" Hank shouted, his voice cutting clean through the noise. "They're shootin' blind. Follow the echoes. Listen!" A horse screamed nearby, shrill, desperate. "That's Crow's gelding," Hank said, head snapping toward the sound. 6 o'clock, close wall. He cocked his lever-action shotgun, aimed in the direction of the echo, and fired. The blast lit up the canyon wall like lightning. Above, another outlaw shouted, "Fall back!" The shooting slowed. 2 more shots fired half-heartedly from above, then silence. Then, just wind again. Dusty pulled up beside Hank. "You all right?" "Still breathing," the old man muttered. "Eli's hit," Dusty said, glancing back. "I'm fine," Eli snapped through clenched teeth. "Just a scratch." "Where the hell's Mason?" Dusty asked suddenly. Everyone froze. In the heat of the gunfire, no one had noticed. He'd been right behind Hank. Now, nothing. No horse, no voice, no shots from him either. "Maybe he went around?" Eli offered, uncertain. Hank shook his head slowly. "Ain't no way around. This canyon's a goddamn funnel. You go forward, or you turn back. Dusty turned a full circle, scanning the cliffs, the shadows, the walls. Nothing. The body of the outlaw Dusty had shot lay still, blood darkening the rock. The other attackers had vanished, retreating into cracks in the cliffs like rats. The canyon had gone quiet again. Too quiet. All that was left was the stink of gunpowder, the ringing in their ears, and the echo of cowboy curses still fading across the hills. And Mason. Mason was nowhere to be seen. Dawn broke slow and blood-colored, smearing across the pale Texas sky like the aftermath of a knife fight. Smoke still lingered in the air, thin but bitter, clinging to clothes, nostrils, and memory alike. The ground was scattered with bits of rock. Hooves had churned the soil, and the metallic scent of old gunpowder hung heavy, like a warning not yet lifted. Dusty squatted by the fallen outlaw, now cold and stiff, the body half shrouded in a blanket. "Ain't no one come back to claim him," he muttered. Eli was pacing. His shirt was torn and blood-stained, the graze on his arm wrapped with a strip of his own bandana. "He was right behind me," Eli growled, eyes flicking from rock to bush to shadow. "I heard him." Hank sat cross-legged on the dirt, hat pulled low, fingers rubbing a spot of loose gravel into his palm like it might tell him something. He said nothing, not yet. Then came hoofbeats. Mason rode in from the east side, calm as Sunday supper. His hat was askew, shirt half untucked, and one boot covered in fresh mud. He dismounted without urgency, brushing dust from his shoulder. "Where the hell'd you go?" Eli barked, stepping forward. "Got thrown," Mason said flatly, looping his reins around a jagged stump. "Horse spooked, damn near broke my damn neck. Spent half the night trying to circle back through the rocks." "That's so." Eli's eyes narrowed. Mason looked him dead in the face. "You calling me a liar?" Dusty stepped between them before Eli could spit back. "We all got rattled. Let's not start throwing fists before breakfast." "I ain't throwing nothing. Just don't like ghosts riding with me," Eli muttered. Hank finally spoke. "What trail you take to get back?" Mason hesitated. "Same one we came in on." "No, you didn't," Hank said softly. "Rocks ain't shifted, but your boots are caked in river muck. You came up from the dry wash." There was a beat of silence. Mason didn't blink. "Had to double back, found an easier climb that way." "Must have been real easy," Eli snapped. "You didn't fire a damn shot last night." Mason stared at him. "Didn't have a line of sight." "You want me shooting blind and hitting your fool head?" The fire crackled low nearby, a pot of beans bubbling quietly in the iron belly of a kettle. The tension felt thick, taut, like the final tug on a rope before it snapped. Dusty sighed and walked off toward the horses. Hank reached down and picked up a scrap of cord that had gotten snagged on a rock. He rubbed it between his fingers. "Jute rope," he murmured. "New. Ain't ours." He stood, slowly, knees popping as he rose. Then he crouched again, fingertips brushing the dirt. There, half buried beneath loose shale, a boot print. Different tread. Too clean. And etched into the heel, a faint letter C. Hank's fingers lingered near the print. He lifted his head slightly. "Gun oil," he said. "Ain't mine. Someone's been cleaning weapons too close to our camp. Maybe it's theirs," Dusty called over from the horses. "One of the ones ambushed us." "Maybe," Hank said. "But theirs don't wear cavalry-issue boots." He turned toward the others, voice low and steady. "They're not gone. They're watching, waiting." A hush fell. Mason said nothing. Eli's hand hovered near his pistol. Dusty stared out into the canyon's edge, eyes scanning the ridge. And Hank, blind as a bat but somehow always seeing more than most, turned his face toward the wind and said, "They're still out there." The town lay forgotten between two ridges, sunburned and gasping, like a drunk curled up in the heat too long. Dust blanketed everything: porches, wagons, the wooden church with its missing bell. Even the lifeless carcass of a steer slumped against the corral fence. Paint peeled from walls like old scabs, and the buildings leaned ever so slightly, as if waiting to give up and fall. The cowboys rode in slow. The creak of saddle leather echoed louder than any welcome. They passed an old man rocking in a chair, pipe clenched between toothless gums. He didn't wave, just watched with eyes like dry wells. Eli slumped in his saddle, face drawn, the bandage on his arm soaked through. Dusty glanced over, jaw tight. "We need a doctor," Dusty muttered. "Or a damn miracle." "She's both," said Hank, nudging his horse toward the faded storefront that once said Rose's Goods and Remedies. The door creaked open before they reached it. She stood there like she'd always been part of the land, tall, sun-darkened skin, hair in a gray braid slung over her shoulder, eyes like a canyon storm. "Put him down," she said, jerking her chin at Eli. "Inside. Now." Eli tried to argue, but she waved him off like a fly. Within minutes he was laid across a low cot in the back room, shirt peeled off, the wound cleaned with a sting of alcohol that had him cursing loud enough to wake the dead. "You scream like a man who's never been shot," Rose said, deadpan. "You'll live." Dusty chuckled from the doorway. She didn't smile back, but her eyes softened for a moment when they met his. "Appreciate what you're doing," he said. She handed him a cloth. "Wipe your boots before you track blood through my kitchen." Outside, the day dragged on, hot and still. Flies buzzed around the saloon doors where a broken guitar string twanged now and then. The scent of chili stew drifted from a pot somewhere behind Rose's place. Thick, spicy, promising warmth. Cornmeal fried in lard popped and sizzled, its sharp smell cutting through the grit. Dusty lingered near the porch, watching Rose move. Quiet, but quick. Pouring water, tying bandages, muttering under her breath. There was something fierce in the way she moved, like she'd wrestled this dying town into staying alive with her bare hands. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Who else would?" "No family?" "Had some." She paused. "Wind took 'em. Or the war. Hard to say." He nodded. No more questions. Hank had wandered off, cane tapping as he walked, boots scuffing the dirt. He stopped near the broken church, where the door swung on rusted hinges. His head tilted slightly. "You hear that?" he called. Dusty turned. "Hear what?" "Bell's gone," Hank said, pointing. "But I heard a chime, real soft." "Ghost. Maybe inside." Eli grumbled from his cot. "I think that moonshine's finally made you crazy, old man." But Hank wasn't smiling. "Sound like a warning." Then came the rider, a boy barely 15, on a thin, wheezing mare. He slid off before the horse stopped moving, boots thudding hard. "Crow's boys," he gasped. "The gatherin' past the salt flats. 20, maybe more." Rose stiffened. "They've been sniffin' round the well trail," the boy added. "Heard 'em say it's their land now." Silence fell like a dropped knife. Dusty stepped off the porch. "Where's that well?" Rose wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll show you," she said. "But if we're goin', we leave before sundown. No one makes it through that desert after dark." Hank nodded slowly, face turned to the west where the sun baked the earth flat and hard. "You lead," he said. We'll follow, and from somewhere far off, maybe just memory, the wind carried a single clear note, like a bell long broken, ringing once more. The sun came up like a curse, all fire and fury, turning the sand into a bed of coals beneath the horses' hooves. By mid-morning, the desert was alive with heat. Waves shimmered on the horizon, the ground cracked beneath boots, and even the sky looked bruised from holding back the weight of the sun. They moved slow. The wind was dry as bone, scraping lips, stinging eyes. The Chihuahuan desert showed no mercy, just a wide stretch of nothing, broken only by the occasional twisted mesquite or rattler skull baking white on a rock. Dusty's shirt stuck to his back. Eli's mouth was cracked open, tongue swollen like a man 2 days dead. The canteens clinked hollow. "We should have stayed in that damn town," Eli muttered, stumbling beside his horse. "This is suicide." "No," Hank said simply. "This is necessary." He rode ahead, steady and straight, his face turned ever so slightly toward the south. He couldn't see, but somehow he knew. One hand rested gently on the saddle horn, the other tracing constellations only he could feel. "Water's close," he added. "The ground smells different." Eli laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Only thing I smell is my own damn sweat." "Keep moving," Rose said, nudging her horse up beside him. Her skin had turned raw beneath the bandana. Complaining doesn't make the sun any cooler. Behind them, Mason lagged, eyes always moving, not from fatigue but calculation. At one point he tugged the reins of his horse and veered slightly off course toward a patch of rock and shadow. Dusty noticed. "Where the hell's he goin'?" he grumbled. Hank didn't turn. "He's chasing ghosts." They pressed on. Cows bawled behind them, hot, desperate, loud enough to make your teeth ache. One calf collapsed mid-step, legs buckling like straw. Eli cursed and reached for his flask again, tipping it to his lips, only to find a single drop left. "God damn it!" He flung the flask. It clanked off a rock and spun into the dust. Just when the heat felt like it might peel skin from bone, Hank raised his hand. "Here," he said. They stopped at what looked like nothing, just rock and sand, brittle shrubs clinging to life. But Hank dismounted, got to his knees, and pressed his palm flat against a thin crack in the stone. He leaned in, lips barely moving, then turned toward Dusty. "Start digging." "With what?" "Anything you got." They dug. Fingernails bled. Boots scraped at stone. They used knives, belt buckles, even the heel of a broken horseshoe. For hours, nothing came, just dry dirt and sore muscles. Then, just before dawn, the earth gave a whisper. A population. A shift. And suddenly, a hiss. Water surged up like breath held too long, bubbling from the rock in a muddy stream. The sound made the cattle rear and bellow. Eli dropped to his knees, splashing water over his face like a man reborn. Rose held a tin cup under the flow and handed it to Hank, who drank slowly, reverently. Dusty laughed, loud and raw. "Son of a bitch," he said. "You were right. I said I'd find it," Hank murmured. Behind them the sun broke the horizon, no longer an enemy, just another day's start. As they set camp, letting the animals drink in turns, Rose wandered off to collect mesquite bark for fire. That's when she heard it. Low voices. She crept closer behind a thicket of thorn brush, careful not to snap a twig. Mason stood near a jagged bluff, back half-turned, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "Just keep 'em movin'," he whispered. "They trust me." A pause, then the voice of another man, rough, unfamiliar. "They better, or your deal's off." Rose held her breath. The wind picked up, kicking dust into her eyes. When she looked again, Mason was walking back toward camp like nothing had happened. But her stomach turned cold, and for the first time in days, she felt something worse than heat. Doubt. The old bell tower groaned in the wind, its single cracked bell swaying just enough to let out a hollow, broken chime. The sound wandered across the grassland like a wounded animal, half mournful, half holy. What remained of the church leaned sideways, its wood blackened by time, its roof patched with tin and prayer. The riders dismounted slow. The cattle had been left grazing by a shallow wash, their low moans rolling across the open land. Hank stood with his hand on the doorframe, cane tapping at the warped boards. He breathed in deep, nostrils flaring at the smell of dust, candle wax, and old pine gone soft with rot. Inside, light flickered, small candles set in bottles along the altar, shadows dancing across walls carved with names long forgotten. The pews were crooked, some broken in half. But one man stood steady at the front. "Welcome, travelers," he said, voice warm as a fire in winter. His beard was snow-white, his hands rough as leather. He wore no collar, no robe, just a patched shirt and the weight of patience in his eyes. "Father Samuel," Rose greeted softly. "Didn't expect to see you still keeping this place alive." He chuckled. "Alive? Maybe not. But as long as a candle burns, a man can still pray." The group gathered in the front pews. Dusty set a pot on the small iron stove, filling the air with the scent of bitter black coffee. Rose unwrapped a cloth bundle, cornbread, dense and warm, baked hard so it would last the trail. They passed it around, fingers brushing as they broke it into pieces. Father Samuel lifted his hand. "Eat, drink. The desert takes much. Best we share what little it leaves." Eli tore at his bread, scowling. "Food don't change the fact we're being hunted." The old priest looked at him kindly. "No, but faith changes how you face it." The words hung in the air, simple as stones. Hank tilted his head, as though letting the sound roll through him. Rose lowered her eyes, lips moving with an old prayer she hadn't spoken in years. Even Dusty went quiet, staring into the swirl of steam rising from his tin cup. Then Mason laughed, short, sharp. "Faith," he sneered. "Faith don't stop bullets. Faith don't dig wells. Men do. Guns do. And anyone thinking otherwise is fooling themselves." His voice cracked like a whip in the silence. The others turned. His eyes glinted in the candlelight, hard, restless, something sharp beneath the surface. "Calm down," Dusty said, raising a hand. "I am calm," Mason shot back, too fast, too loud. He slammed his cup onto the bench, liquid splattering across the wood. "Just tired of listening to fairy tales when we ought to be talking about fighting." Eli bristled. Rose's hand drifted toward her satchel. Father Samuel didn't flinch. "You'll need both," the old priest said softly. "Fight, yes, but also believe in one another, or else you'll fight alone." Mason's jaw worked, but he said nothing. His shoulders stiffened, his glare cut toward Hank. The blind man hadn't moved all night. Now he rose slow, leaning on his cane. He turned his face toward Mason as if the darkness behind his eyes could see clearer than any candle. His voice was low, nearly drowned by the wind sneaking through the broken roof. "The wolf's showing its teeth," Hank murmured. The candles flickered. Somewhere outside a coyote howled. And silence pressed down hard, heavier than the desert heat. The creek shimmered under the noon sun, cool and inviting, its surface broken by the lazy drift of cottonwood shadows. The herd drank greedily, their bellows echoing like tired songs across the bank. Dusty cupped water in his hands, splashing his face with a sigh. For a moment it felt almost peaceful. Too peaceful. Hank sat a little apart, cane propped against his knee, his blind eyes fixed on nothing and everything. His head tilted, nostrils flaring. "Smell that?" he asked. "Smell what?" Eli muttered, kneeling to rinse his bandaged arm. "Smoke," Hank said. His voice was steady but sharp. "Ain't ours." Before anyone could answer, the trap sprang. Boom! The ground shook as a buried keg erupted, flames curling through the dry grass. Cottonwood leaves flared like tinder. Smoke billowed thick, stinging eyes and throats, swallowing the creek in a choking haze. Horses screamed, rearing and kicking. The cattle surged, slamming against one another in panic. Gunfire followed, sharp, cracking shots from the ridge. Bullets sparked against rocks and tore through branches. "Down!" Dusty roared, dragging Eli flat. A slug cupped the air where Eli's head had been, shredding bark. Shapes moved through the haze, dark figures, slipping between cottonwoods, rifles spitting fire. "Silas Crow!" someone shouted from the smoke. "You sons of whores picked the wrong trail!" Eli fumbled with his revolver, coughing hard. "Can't see a damn thing." "Don't need eyes," Hank rasped, already on his feet. He turned his face into the smoke, listening. "Fire spreads east. Shooters on the windward side. Aim there." Rose fired first, her shotgun booming. A scream answered. Dusty rolled, cocked, and snapped 2 shots toward a flash of muzzle fire. More bullets rained down. The smoke turned the air into a blindfold. "Left bank," Hank barked. "By the Boylan Sound." They obeyed. Eli squeezed off a shot, and a man tumbled, clutching his gut, splashing into the creek. Another outlaw leapt from cover, but Dusty tackled Eli sideways, dragging him clear just as lead chewed a line through the dirt. Dusty's rifle cracked from the ground, and the outlaw's hat flew off as he collapsed, unmoving. The battle was chaos. Shouts, curses, the sulfur stink of spent powder mixing with the acrid bite of burning wood. The sound of the creek, once gentle, hissed like it boiled under the heat. Then silence fell in jagged pieces. The gunfire sputtered out. Smoke still curled through the trees, but the attackers had melted away, their taunts replaced by the distant drum of retreating hooves. Dusty pulled Eli up. "You all right?" "Hell no," Eli coughed, brushing ash from his eyes. "But I ain't dead, thanks to you." "Don't mention it." Rose reloaded with shaking hands. "They wanted us penned here, burned out." "Didn't work," Dusty growled. Hank knelt slowly, running his hand across the churned dirt. His fingers brushed something metallic. He held it up. A casing, still warm. "Different brass," he muttered. "Not Crow's usual." The group exchanged looks, uneasy. Behind them the herd had scattered. A horse whinnied, tether snapping against a charred stump. Dusty turned sharply. "One's gone," he said. His stomach sank. They stared into the drifting smoke, ears straining. Somewhere out there a rider was leaving with a stolen mount. And it sure as hell wasn't one of Crow's. The sky turned the color of blood at sundown, heavy clouds rolling in like war drums. Wind howled across the flats, sharp as broken glass, carrying with it the low moan of a storm rising from the desert floor. Horses stamped and tossed their heads. The cattle bawled, tails lashing, sensing the fury about to fall. Then the sand came. It roared like a living thing, a wall of grit and dust sweeping down the plain with a sound like 1,000 drums. The air itself turned into knives. Grains of sand lashed at faces, stung skin raw, forced tears from eyes that couldn't open fast enough. "God Almighty!" Eli shouted, spitting grit. "We're dead men! Shut your damn mouth!" Dusty growled, wrapping a bandana over his nose and eyes. He yanked his horse hard, trying to keep it steady, but the beast reared in blind panic. Rose coughed, bent low over her saddle. "We can't hold the herd!" The cattle surged in terror, smashing into one another, hooves pounding like thunder. Several broke wide, swallowed by the swirling wall of sand. Through it all, Hank sat upright, his cane strapped to his saddle, head tilted back as if he could hear something in the storm no one else could. His face was cut by the wind, but his voice, when it came, was louder than the gale. "Listen!" he bellowed. No one did at first. They were too busy cursing, choking, fighting their animals. Then the sound cut through the chaos, a hollow clang, faint but steady. Clong, clong, clong. The cowbell of the lead steer. Hank's blind eyes narrowed. "Follow the bell! Keep tight! Don't break rank!" Dusty turned, heard it, and roared back. "You heard him! Stay with the bell!" They rallied, shoving cattle shoulder to shoulder, yelling, cracking whips, pushing them toward the sound. Eli coughed blood into his bandana, forcing his horse alongside Dusty's. Rose leaned down, striking at strays with the flat of her rifle to drive them back into the mass. Behind them, chaos raged, horns clashing, hooves stumbling. A calf bawled high and desperate, smothered almost at once by sand. Then came another voice, thin and sharp. Mason's. "Hell with this!" he shouted, eyes wild, scarf torn from his face. He spun his horse sideways, breaking from the herd. Dusty saw him vanish into the storm's gut, swallowed whole. "Bastard's runnin'!" Dusty yelled. "Leave him!" Hank thundered. "Stay with the bell!" The storm swallowed words. All that remained was the bell's rhythm, the endless scream of wind, and Hank's ragged voice cutting through it. "Forward! Forward, damn you! Don't you break!" Hours, or maybe only minutes, passed in that burning dark. Time had no meaning inside the sand's fury. Every breath was pain, every shout swallowed by the storm. Yet, slowly, step by dragging step, the herd followed the bell, clustered tight against the rage of the desert. Then, as sudden as it had come, the storm broke. The wall of sand thinned, peeled away, revealing a sky, raw and clear. The world lay still again. The herd huddled and shivering, but alive. The riders slumped in their saddles, coughing, eyes swollen red. Rose's hair was caked with grit. Eli's arm bled anew where the bandage had torn. Dusty spat mud, but Hank sat tall, chest heaving, listening, still. On the edge of the trampled ground lay something half buried, drops of blood, dark against the pale sand. A set of boot tracks cut away from the herd, leading into the emptiness beyond. Mason's trail. Hank's jaw tightened. He touched the ground with his fingers, sand running like water through his hand. "The wolf's loose," he murmured, and the desert, still echoing with the memory of the storm, gave no answer. The fire glowed low against the cliff wall, embers pulsing like the heart of a dying beast. Shadows stretched long and thin, dancing up the jagged stone as the wind whistled softly through cracks above. The night air was sharp, but here beneath the overhang they found a pocket of stillness, a rare reprieve from the desert's wrath. The smell of burning resin filled the shelter, sticky and harsh. Bits of ash drifted up, glowing before vanishing into the dark. The herd rested down the slope, restless but quiet, their silhouettes shifting in the moonlight. Rose knelt beside Eli, her hands sure and steady. She peeled back the rough bandage on his arm. The wound had reopened during the storm, angry and raw. Eli hissed when the cool cloth pressed against it. "Stop squirming," Rose said. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. "You'll make it worse." Eli gritted his teeth. "Hell, I've been shot before." "Then you should know better than to whine." Dusty smirked from across the fire. "She's got you there." "Shut it," Eli muttered, though a hint of a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Rose tied the bandage with a tug that made him curse, then leaned back with a satisfied nod. "That'll hold." Dusty shifted closer, running a thumb along the rim of his tin cup. He cleared his throat, eyes darting between Rose and the flames. You handle yourself better than most men I've ridden with," he said. His tone was clumsy, words roughened by nerves. "That takes grit." Rose arched a brow. "You call that a compliment?" Dusty flushed and looked down into his cup. "Ain't good with words. Just mean. I notice." Her lips twitched like she might laugh, but instead she poured herself coffee, letting the silence hang. The sound of the fire filled the space where Dusty's courage had failed him. On the other side of the flames, Hank sat still, cane resting across his lap. His blind eyes reflected the fire, clouded but unblinking. Finally, he spoke, voice low and gravelly. "You boys ever wonder how a man ends up walking the trail without his eyes?" The fire popped. Dusty looked up. Eli leaned forward despite himself. Rose glanced over, her face softening. Hank tilted his head back, breathing deep, like he was reaching back through the years. "It was Dodge," he said. "Some 20 years ago. Streets were meaner then, drunk with whiskey and greed. I was young, quicker with a pistol than sense. Thought I could outdraw any man alive." His fingers traced the cane absent-mindedly. "One night, I called out a man named Rafe Calder. He was no outlaw, just proud, same as me. Folks gathered, wagers laid. Sun dropped, and we faced each other in the street." His voice grew quiet, heavy with memory. "I was fast, but pride makes you slow where it counts. He shot first. Bullet caught me square in the eyes. Darkness fell, just like that." He snapped his fingers, woke up in blood and bandages, world gone black. No one moved. Even Eli forgot to scowl. "I should have died bitter," Hank continued. "But the trail don't leave room for pity. You either learn other ways to see, or you lay down and let the buzzards finish you. So I learned the wind, the ground, the sound of a horse's step, learned to listen harder than any man with eyes ever could. The fire cracked, filling the silence that followed. Then walkin' blind ever since, Hank said. He leaned forward, his expression hard. But don't you mistake it for weakness. I still know the trail, and I still know the sound of a coward's heart when it beats too fast. The words hung like iron. Dusty and Eli both shifted uncomfortably, but neither dared speak. Rose's eyes lingered on Hank, a flicker of respect warming her face. The night deepened. Outside, the desert breathed. Then, from far off, a sound cut through the stillness, a long, mournful howl. Another joined it, then another. Wolves. The pack's cries rose and fell with the wind, threading through the rocks until it felt like the howls came from everywhere at once. Hank's head turned toward the sound. His fingers tightened on the cane. Storms passed, he murmured, but the night ain't done with us yet. The fire snapped, sending a spray of sparks up into the black, and somewhere in that darkness, the wolves kept singing. The prairie stretched endless under a moonless sky, black as a coal seam, broken only by the glow of scattered torches. The herd shifted nervously, hooves pounding in uneven rhythm, horns clacking in the dark. Then came the sound that froze every man's blood. A low, rolling growl, answered by another, and then another. Green eyes lit the night like scattered embers, dozens of them, wolves, lean and starving, encircling the camp. "Sweet Jesus," Eli whispered, his hand trembling around the trigger of his rifle. "Hold steady," Hank barked, his voice rough but certain. He rose from where he sat, cane in one hand, torch in the other. "Dusty, Rose, push the cattle inward. Keep 'em tight." The night came alive with snarls. Shapes darted between the torchlight, shadows of fur and teeth. The cattle bawled, crashing against one another, panic spreading like fire in dry grass. "Form the circle," Hank ordered. "Yokes and saddles for a fence. Pile 'em high." Dusty leapt into motion, grabbing spare saddles, shoving them against the ring of cattle. Rose followed, torch lifted high, sparks spraying as the dry grass caught along the edge. The smell of singed hair and burning resin filled the air. Eli stood frozen, rifle raised, his eyes wide. A wolf lunged forward, teeth flashing in the firelight. Hank swung his cane hard, striking sparks off a rock as he drove the beast back. "Shoot low if you shoot," Hank growled, "but don't waste bullets. Fire scares 'em more than lead." The wolves paced closer, the torchlight painting their coats in streaks of black and silver. Growls became barks, sharp and biting. The circle held, men and women shouting, torches waving. Cattle pressed tight in fear. Eli's finger twitched on the trigger. Sweat poured down his temples. The rifle bucked with a deafening crack, the bullet striking dirt and stone. The blast echoed across the prairie. The wolves stopped. Dozens of glowing eyes stared at the line of riders, unblinking. Then, as if moved by a single thought, they began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster, melting into the dark until only silence remained. The cattle still panted, steam rising off their backs. The torches burned low, hissing in the night wind. For a long stretch, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than the howls had been. Dusty exhaled, lowering his rifle. "Never thought I'd see the day wolves back down from us." "They weren't beaten," Hank muttered, tilting his head as though still listening. "They were called off." Rose frowned. "Called off?" But Hank didn't answer. She turned toward the prairie, and her breath caught. For an instant, so faint she thought it a trick of smoke, she saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing just beyond the last line of wolf eyes, watching, then gone. Rose's hand tightened around the torch. "Something out there," she whispered. The fire popped, sending sparks swirling skyward. The wind carried the last faint stench of scorched fur, and the prairie fell back into its uneasy quiet, as if the wolves had never been there at all. The prairie at night stretched wide and empty, the grass hissing under a knife-edged wind. Cold bit through wool and leather, carrying the sharp scent of sage. Far ahead, a faint glow wavered against the black, an oil lamp, swaying in the dark like a lone star fallen to earth. Dusty reined in, squinting. "The hell's that?" Eli spat grit, rifle across his lap. "Looks like trouble wearing a light." Rose narrowed her eyes, but said nothing. The herd shifted nervously behind them, longhorns snorting steam into the cold. Hank tilted his head, listening. "Too still," he murmured. "Wind carries fire different. That lamp's set on purpose." Before anyone could answer, a figure stumbled into the glow. "Mason!" Eli hissed. He staggered forward, arms outstretched, face smeared with dust and blood. His shirt was torn, hat gone, his gait clumsy as a drunk's. "Help!" he croaked. "For God's sake, help me!" Eli's rifle snapped up. "Bastard sold us out. I'll drop him right here." "Hold!" Hank's cane tapped the ground like a gavel. His blind eyes turned toward the sound of Mason's boots. "Wait." Mason collapsed to his knees, clutching at the dirt. "Crow's men ambushed me, left me for dead. Please, I swear it wasn't my fault." The words hung in the cold, the only sound louder than the restless hooves. Then the night split open. Crack! Gunfire exploded from the dark edges of the field. Bullets hissed into the dirt, sparks leaping from stone. The herd bawled, crashing against itself in blind panic. "Goddamn trap!" Eli shouted, firing back into the shadows. Dusty wheeled his horse, returning fire. Rose grabbed the reins of a spooked steer, dragging it back into the circle. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking, mixing with the sudden stink of grass catching flame. Mason threw himself flat, rolling clear of the first volley with practiced ease. Too practiced. The fear in his face slipped, replaced by the hard grin of a man who knew exactly when to duck. "You son of a—" Eli growled, leveling his rifle again. Hank raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. "It's Crow! He's here himself!" The enemy whooped and cursed from the dark, their voices riding the wind like knives. Gun smoke curled thick, lit by the sputtering oil lamp that swayed with every shot. Hank didn't flinch. He sat tall in the saddle, head cocked, listening past the gunfire. "Wind's turning south," he said. "That's our road out." Eli fired again, rage boiling over. "And Mason? You want me to leave that rat breathing?" "Leave him," Hank said flatly. He made his bed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dusty glanced at Rose, who bit her lip, but gave a sharp nod. Hank's cane tapped twice against his stirrup. "Move!" The riders broke hard, spurring into the teeth of the wind. Gunfire chased them, hot lead sparking against stone, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burned grass. Cowboys cursed, cattle bawled, hooves thundered. Behind them, Mason scrambled upright, screaming into the night as the Crow gang pressed forward around him. But no one looked back. The herd, the riders, and the blind old trail boss vanished into the dark, the wind carrying them clear, and Mason's cries were swallowed by the gunfire and the smoke. The dawn rose red as a butcher's cloth, spilling across the open prairie. Mist clung low to the grass, but the mist wasn't clean. It carried the copper tang of blood. The herd shifted uneasily, longhorns stamping, their breaths steaming in the chill of morning. Dusty's rifle lay across his knees. Eli tightened the bandage on his arm, jaw clenched against the pain. Rose checked her shotgun, eyes scanning the horizon. Hank sat still, head tilted, listening to the land breathe. Then came the sound, the heavy thunder of hooves, not cattle but riders, dozens of them, the Crow gang. Out of the mist, Silas Crow rode tall in the saddle, black hat pulled low, coat flaring like wings. At his side was Jeb, his second, grinning like a dog on a fresh kill. Behind them stretched a ragged line of outlaws, rifles glinting, voices shouting wild curses. "Circles tight," Dusty barked, spurring his horse. "Keep the herd close." The cattle bellowed, confused and frightened, hooves drumming the ground. The Crow riders fanned wide, encircling them, yells echoing across the prairie. "Now!" Silas shouted, raising his pistol. Gunfire cracked. The morning exploded. The herd surged, smashing against itself, horns slicing, dust and blood rising in a storm. Riders darted in and out, bullets whining, sparks flying from rocks. Saddles creaked, leather snapped, and the air filled with the choking stench of powder smoke. Hank lifted a small bell from his saddle, shook it once, the sharp clang cutting through the roar. "South line, push left," he commanded. They obeyed. The sound became their compass, the blind man's voice steering them like iron through the fire. Eli fired back, teeth bared. A slug slammed into his side, knocking him from the saddle. He hit the dirt hard, blood soaking through his shirt. "Eli!" Rose screamed, dragging him toward cover, her shotgun booming twice, each blast scattering dust and screams. Jeb charged in from the flank, grinning wide, revolver flashing. Dusty met him head-on, rifle raised. Their horses collided, the two men grappling, fists and steel clashing. Dusty twisted free, jammed the rifle barrel up, and pulled the trigger. Crack! Jeb's body jerked, the grin frozen on his lips as he toppled from the saddle into the blood-soaked grass. "Jeb's down!" someone cried. The fight only grew hotter. Silas spurred forward, firing into the air, his voice rolling over the field. "Don't let up! Drive 'em under!" The grass was slick with red now, bodies, man and beast, falling where they stood. The cattle bawled, terrified, horns glistening with blood. Gunfire thundered, louder than the herd, louder than the wind. Dusty wiped sweat and powder from his brow, eyes wild. Rose fired until her shotgun smoked, then reloaded with shaking hands. Eli groaned, pale but still clutching his revolver. Hank sat straight, the bell clanging again and again, his voice carrying clear commands even through the chaos. Then the air split with Silas's roar. "Mason!" he bellowed across the field, his voice ragged with fury. "Your turn!" The name cut through the gunfire like a blade. Dusty and Rose froze. Even Eli, bleeding in the dirt, looked up in shock. Hank's face tightened, blind eyes turned toward the sound. And in that moment, every shot, every scream, every hoofbeat seemed to hang in the air, waiting to see which side Mason stood on. Smoke lay thick across the prairie, curling low in the dawn light. Gunfire still cracked in the distance, but here, at the center of the chaos, time slowed to a crawl. Mason stood, trembling, his revolver loose in his sweaty grip. His boots slipped on blood-slick grass, and his eyes darted from one side to the other, wild as a cornered calf. His breath came sharp and shallow, chest heaving with panic. Silas Crow loomed before him, pistol steady in his own hand, eyes cold as slate. Dust clung to his long coat, the brim of his black hat shadowing his face. "Do it," he snarled, shoving Mason forward. "Prove yourself." He nodded toward Hank. The blind trail boss stood straight, cane at his side, head tilted ever so slightly, as if listening to Mason's every heartbeat. Dusty and the others froze where they stood, guns half raised, waiting. Mason's arm wavered. The revolver shook. He swallowed hard, throat working. His finger brushed the trigger, but his knees buckled as though the weight of the gun was too much to bear. "Do it!" Silas roared, his voice cutting over the gunfire. He shoved Mason again, harder. Mason lifted the revolver with both hands now, aiming clumsily toward Hank. His teeth chattered, his whole body trembling. Sweat dripped down his temple, streaking the dirt and blood caked there. For a long second, the world held still. Only the smell of gunpowder, the soft moan of wounded cattle, the sting of smoke in their eyes. Then Mason moved. The revolver swung, not toward Hank, but back, fast and desperate toward Silas. Dusty shouted, "He's turning!" The shot never came. Silas was quicker. His pistol barked once, the sound flat and final. Mason jerked as the bullet tore through his chest. His revolver tumbled from nerveless fingers, clattering into the grass. He staggered, coughed a spray of blood, then collapsed face first into the dirt. The silence that followed was colder than the gunshot. Dusty spat, jaw tight. Rose closed her eyes for a beat. Eli groaned from where he lay wounded, but even he said nothing. Mason's body twitched once, then stilled. Silas holstered his pistol slow, gaze sweeping the field. His mouth twisted in a cruel smile. "That's what loyalty buys." The words were still hanging in the smoke when Hank straightened, shoulders squared. His blind eyes burned white in the dawn light, and his voice came low and furious. "Enough." He raised his cane like a saber and bellowed, the sound ripping from deep in his chest. "Take them all!" The order thundered across the prairie, louder than the cattle's bawl, sharper than the gunfire, and the battlefield, thick with smoke and blood, exploded once more. The noon sun bore down mercilessly, baking the prairie until the very air shimmered with heat. The metallic tang of scorched iron and boiling gun barrels clung to every breath. Dust rose in choking clouds, blotting out patches of sky, and through it all came the ragged screams of men and the terrified bawl of cattle. Eli lay slumped against a saddle thrown onto the dirt, blood soaking his side, his face ashen, but his jaw clenched in stubborn defiance. Rose crouched at his side, her hands slick with crimson as she tried to hold him together, whispering prayers that fought to be heard over the roar of gunfire. Dusty fired from behind a splintered wagon wheel, his rifle bucking against his shoulder. Every shot was measured, precise, but his breath came hot and angry. Each pull of the trigger a curse spat toward Silas and his crew. And Hank. Hank stood in the open. The blind trail boss looked more statue than man, his weathered face set like granite beneath his brimmed hat. His cane hung at his side, but in his other hand gleamed the cold steel of his revolver. His head tilted, ears twitching like those of a hunting hound. Every hoofbeat, every scrape of leather, every rasp of breath carried to him through the furnace-thick air. Silas was out there, circling, his voice cutting like a whip through the chaos. "You're finished, old man," he bellowed. "I'll gut you and scatter your herd to the wind." The Crow gang's horses shrieked as they darted through the smoke, saddles creaking, stirrups clanging. Hank turned slightly, nostrils flaring. He could smell it. The acrid stink of overheated grease, the tang of gun oil cooking under the sun. And beneath it all, one sound, subtle but distinct. The high-pitched squeal of a leather cinch grinding against metal. A saddle, shifting under a heavy rider. Hank raised his revolver. Rose gasped, clutching Eli tighter. Dusty swore under his breath, ready to cover the old man. The prairie stilled for a heartbeat. Even the cattle seemed to pause, their terrified lowing fading into silence. Hank's revolver cracked once. The shot ripped through the smoke like thunder. There was a strangled cry followed by the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the ground. Silas Crow lay sprawled in the dirt, his black hat blown clear, his chest blooming red. His eyes went wide in disbelief, lips forming a curse that never came. He twitched once, then fell still, dust settling across his lifeless body. For a moment, no one moved. Then the prairie erupted. What was left of the Crow gang broke, their cries sharp with panic as they scrambled to flee. Horses bolted, spurred hard, leaving the battlefield strewn with bodies and blood. The echoes of their retreat carried far, swallowed by the heat-shimmering horizon. Dusty shouted in triumph, voice ragged. Rose sobbed with relief, pressing her forehead to Eli's. But Hank, the old cowboy's revolver slipped from his fingers, tumbling into the dust. His shoulders sagged. A dark stain spread across his shirt, seeping fast. He staggered once, then his knees gave way, the sun blazing down on him like a merciless spotlight. He dropped to the ground, chest heaving, blood soaking his weathered coat. The sound of fleeing hooves faded, replaced by the rasp of his own labored breathing. The herd bawled in the distance, restless but alive. The battle was over, but Hank lay still, the prairie spinning around him, the world dimming, though his eyes had seen nothing for years. The silence broke with Rose's scream, and then stillness again, broken only by the wind that carried the smell of blood, hot iron, and the echo of victory. The night had finally bled away. As the first light broke over the horizon, a golden wash spilled across the plains, draping the land in quiet majesty. The dew clung to each blade of grass, sparkling like 1,000 tiny stars fallen to earth. After the smoke and blood of the battles past, the sight was almost unreal, soft, forgiving, full of promise. The herd stretched ahead, tired but alive, their low voices carrying across the valley. The air was crisp, still tinged with the smell of gunpowder, but above it drifted the sweeter scent of green pasture. Eli, pale and bandaged, leaned against Rose as she steadied him. His jaw was clenched, but his eyes softened as he watched the cattle step onto fresh grass. She held him close, brushing dust and blood from his face, her touch both firm and tender. The worst had passed, and for the first time, hope shone in his eyes. Dusty stood near them, rifle slung across his back, his broad shoulders sagging with exhaustion. His gaze found Rose's, and though no words passed, something solid was forged in that silence. Trust, unspoken affection, the certainty that neither would face tomorrow alone. And then there was Hank. The old cowboy sat down slowly upon a flat rock, his legs stiff, his hands heavy from the long ordeal. The band of his hat was dark with sweat, his coat torn and stiff with dried blood. Yet his face, weathered and blind, turned toward the east. The golden sun painted his lined features with warmth, and though his eyes were clouded, they seemed to catch the light as if remembering what they once could see. He lifted his chin, inhaling the scent of the fresh grass, the distant sound of cattle settling into their new range, the soft murmur of his companions. Every sound, every smell, every shift of the breeze confirmed what his heart already knew. They had arrived. The others gathered around him. Dusty pulled his hat from his head, bowing low. Rose followed, her dark hair catching the sunlight as she lowered her face in reverence. Even Eli, wounded and weary, took his hat from his head and bent in silence. No one spoke. The moment belonged to the land, the sky, and the man who had brought them here against every odd. Finally, Hank's voice broke the stillness. Rough, cracked, but steady. It carried further than any gunshot ever could. "I told you, boys, I'd get you here," he murmured. "And I have. From here on." He paused, tilting his head as if listening for the echo of his own words in the wind. A faint smile traced his lips. "The rest of the trail belongs to you." The words settled into the morning air, heavier than stone, lighter than prayer. For a moment, none dared breathe. Then, almost as one, they placed their hats against their chests, bowing deeper, honoring not just the man, but the road he had carved with nothing but grit, memory, and the fire of a will that refused to die. The sun rose higher, gilding the New Mexico grasslands in fire and gold. The cattle grazed, the dust settled. Life, fragile, battered, enduring, went on, and Hank sat quietly in its midst, blind eyes lifted to the light he could no longer see, yet brighter in spirit than any sunrise. The journey had ended. The promise was kept. The trail now was theirs. In the end, Hank's story is not just about cattle, guns, or the endless miles of prairie. It's about faith, resilience, and the courage to keep going even when the world turns dark. Sometimes true vision doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. And maybe the question we should all ask ourselves is this: when the storm comes, will we be the one who falters or the one who leads? If this story made you reflect, drop a 1 in the comments. Which state are you watching from? Let me know below. And if you love tales of grit and survival, don't forget to subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you won't miss the next ride.